Hi, I'm Shelby Thompson, and this is my EDL 854 case study. And just to start off, a brief overview. This was a case in George Washington Middle School, and they use their PTA a lot and parent volunteers to help at sporting events through Booster Club. George Washington Middle School has about 450 students, and their student population and socioeconomic status are kind of dwindling because a lot of the people who have more money are starting to go to more suburban cities instead of using George Washington. There has been a student who received all state honors for cheerleading and had been invited to go to New York City to walk in a parade. The student parent had asked the principal if PTA could pay for the trip. The principal said no because that would be a large amount of money to pay for just one student. And so Mr. Stevens, while checking the box for the gate that Mrs. Bowman had been working the next night, he noticed that there wasn't a $50 bill in there that a parent had told him or he had seen a parent pay with, and also the till does not match the amount of tickets sold. So we have a case of, did the parent involved or the person working that gate intentionally take that money or not? So we will continue with the 3 things we know and the 3 things we don't need to know. So the 3 things that we know is that Mrs. Bowman requested for PTA to pay for her daughter's trip, and it had been denied by the principal, Mr. Stevens. We also know that Mr. Dumas paid with a $50 bill. And third, we know that the funds in the money bag do not reflect the tickets sold. The next 3 things are things that I need to know in order to address the problem. Where are the damaged tickets, and could the tickets have been checked before to see if they were ripped, because that is part of the case where tickets 78 and 88, I think, those 10 tickets had been damaged, and Mrs. Bowman had recorded that as being damaged. But I'm wondering, how were those tickets damaged? Where did we put those tickets? Is there a way that we could have checked those to make sure that they're damaged for sure? And then second, did Mrs. Bowman intentionally do this? Did she intentionally damage the tickets, or did she intentionally take the money? And then third, has Mrs. Bowman tried other avenues to fundraise for her daughter's trip? Because to me, if she's tried other avenues, then maybe she's seeing this as a last-ditch effort instead of just getting upset and thinking that it is PTA's job to pay for her daughter's trip. So the problem is that there is money missing from the gate bag, and it doesn't match the statements of how many tickets and what Mr. Dumas said about paying with a $50 bill. So we're missing funds, and there's not a $50 bill in there when we know there should be a $50 bill in there. Next is my proposed plan of action. First, I would schedule a meeting with Mrs. Bowman. And then second, I have a couple new policies that I would put in place to make sure that this doesn't happen. First, the meeting with Mrs. Bowman, I would make sure that I'm not accusatory, and to not let her know right off the bat that I know about the $50 bill that Mr. Dumas paid with. And then just not being accusatory, because I would like to have her own up to it, because I think those are less harsh consequences. If she owns up to it, then it can be fixed a little bit more than if she lies about it. And then, so based on her reactions, I would follow through with the appropriate steps. Did she own up to it? Did she not own up to it? Then there would probably be some policies and procedures that would be in place based upon her reaction in that meeting. So the first new policy that I would put in place is to make sure to have damaged tickets put in the money bag, so that me as the principal can inspect those to make sure that they were actually damaged. Maybe they were damaged in the same way, so that could be suspicious. Or I would also check tickets before the event for damage, making sure that we could take those steps that damage tickets aren't the avenue for misuse of funds. And then my next policy would have two people work the cash gate or have another person check the till that didn't work the cash drawer. So, me as the principal or Mr. Stevens being the first person to check the cash drawer for a problem. There could have been another person to witness or see that there was an issue, as well as making sure that if there was another gate person there, then Mrs. Bowman wouldn't solely be in charge of that gate. So maybe there wasn't more discrepancy there. Okay, next we are covering resolving the issue, keeping in mind the students. For me, I think the principal made the best decision to start off with, keeping in mind the best interests of all the students, so they're not making sure they're spending that money just on one student for their trip. But I think that he could have gone about that meeting maybe a different way, giving the parent a different avenue to fundraise for their child, maybe suggesting a GoFundMe page or asking for donations, or so that it's more focused for that student. Because I do think that that student should be able to go to that all-state, and that the community could help raise those funds in a way to help out. I think in continuing with the procedures, it is important not to punish the daughter for the mother's behavior. So if it is found out that Mrs. Bowman did take those funds, then I think it would be important that the daughter isn't punished for that as well and shamed, and maybe is not able to go to her all-state parade because of that. And then thirdly, I said funds need to be recovered so they can be used for the betterment of all students. It wasn't Mrs. Bowman's place to take those if she did. And in any type of form, the funds need to be recovered so that they can be used for what they were intended, and that is for student activities and things like that. So that brings me to category 4, which is our debrief. So in my reflections, I've kind of hit on this before. I would value her owning up to taking money out of the cash drawer if she did, because I think that would be an automatic, okay, you took money out of the cash drawer, you need to repay it, and then you are no longer going to be allowed to work the gate or the concessions anymore. We'll find other ways for you to volunteer if she does own up to it. Because like I say in the next bullet point, I think most situations start with addressing it and trying to make it right first. So if she's willing to own up to it and make it right first, and this is her first offense, and I think that those are the steps we would take in my reflection of how I would handle that situation. But if she doesn't admit to taking the money, then I feel there would be stricter and more harsh procedures to take place. Like there would have to be maybe law enforcement involved, or some kind of audit take place to where we can find those funds so that we know where they had been misplaced to. And if it does end up being to Ms. Bowman, then I think that there would be harsher punishment for that, being that the law enforcement would be involved. So that brings me to unresolved or open issues. I think an unresolved issue is, how is Mrs. Bowman's daughter going to be able to go to all-state cheerleading? And like I've said before, I think there should have been a suggestion of other avenues for her to fundraise for her student. So, and that the principal could have helped out with those kinds of things, and not just strictly said no, and then not give any other type of suggestion or help. And then the second issue would be, if she does deny taking the money, then it would depend on the policies of how to pursue the next step. So I would consult the district handbook or the state handbook of how those misappropriated funds would be. I would hope that Booster Club would also be involved in these because of their stake in those funds as well. Booster Club should have policies and procedures set in place for their volunteers as well, if they already don't. And that brings me to category 5, which is reflecting on the standard. I think students should always be our focus, and I think Mr. Stevens' first decision was important, and making sure that we're benefiting most students, not just one student, with the use of the funds. So that brings me to the first component, which is how do I as a school leader promote effective and efficient management of the school? I wrote down how putting different policies in, like keeping track of the damaged ticket so that can't happen again, and having another person check the till, and just also by reviewing policies and making changes based on arising problems, as well as following procedures. So I'm being effective and efficient by making sure that I'm always adapting to the different problems that arise, but also foreseeing those problems. Like, I think Mr. Stevens could have foreseen or um, prevented this problem by giving Mrs. Bowman another avenue to fundraise for her student, instead of maybe having her take cash out of the cash drawer, if that is what had happened. Component 2 would be, how do you as a school leader promote the social learning of every student? I would say that promoting the funds be used for all students instead of one, making sure that the funds are being equally dispersed among students, helps with their social learning of how to treat people and how to treat money. Number 2, by making sure the funds were found or appropriated for, so they could be used for those extracurricular activities. I think that helps support social learning by showing students to do the right thing pays off by not having as harsh punishments if they would see Mrs. Bowman's actions and things like that. Number 3, by putting an emphasis on extracurricular activities, it is helping students with social interactions and life skills through those activities. I'm a big supporter of extracurricular activities, and especially in a smaller school district with maybe not so many, with not as good a socioeconomic stability, because that does provide social interactions that are appropriate, that students who do have lower socioeconomic circumstances may not get, because their parents can't provide all of those opportunities for them. So it is then the job of the school to do that for the students. So I think extracurriculars and using extracurricular funds are important in social learning, because it's showing students life skills and how to interact socially that you might not always get inside of a classroom. And then the third component is promoting the academic success. And I think these kind of fall into the same realm of the way I address social learning. I think by students getting involved with extracurricular activities, it helps their academic performance. Not only does it drive maybe some of those students who may not do well in the classroom, but do well with extracurriculars, it drives their academic performance, because they have motivation to do well academically so that they can participate in extracurricular activities. And then number 2, making sure that funds are used appropriately for those extracurricular events better supports their academics as well. They need to make sure that the funds are used appropriately so that we aren't taking away from academic funds to pay for those extracurricular funds. We need to make sure that academic funds are used for academics and extracurricular funds are used for extracurricular events. So if we bleed into those, or we use one for the other, then we might end up taking academic funds for extracurricular funds in some cases. And then third, I am also promoting their academics by modeling, doing the right thing, and following the right steps of problem solving and modifying procedures. They could also use those skills in academics as well. So if they see an adult in their school promoting problem solving and modifying procedures based on problems, then I think that they're going to be more inclined to do that within their academics as well. So I think those are all things that need to be considered within this case study, and I hope you enjoyed listening. Thank you.